Imagine hitting rock bottom. Every cent gone, every hope shattered. That was Colt Brenner, walking into a dusty auction with his last $2. He was looking for anything to save himself, but what he found wasn't a lifeline. It was a beat-up, old donkey nobody else wanted. They laughed at him, told him he was crazy. They had no idea this isn't just a story about a man and his last $2, but about a miracle, and how nobody wanted to buy the old donkey until he made his new owner a millionaire. Stay with us, because what happened next will absolutely astound you. Before we kick things off, tell us, how are things with you today? Share it in the comments below so our community can connect and share together. Now let's begin. The wind over Dry Hollow tasted like rust and regret. Colt Brenner tightened his grip on the $2 in his coat pocket as he stepped into the heat-split dirt of the livestock auction yard. They were slick with sweat and time, the last coins he owned, and they felt like a joke. Like fate was playing one last round of cards and giving him nothing but a pair of twos. He passed rows of strong, polished horses, broad-shouldered stallions with gleaming manes and eyes like thunder, and watched men in clean hats bid with confidence. Laughter rose from the other side of the yard, where a man sold coffee and beans by the cup. The smell of gun oil and manure floated in the air, heavy and old. Colt looked down at his boots, cracked and dust-scuffed, then let his eyes drift across the vendor table nearby. There was a rusted frying pan for sale. He stared at it longer than he meant to. That might be more useful than what I came here for, he thought grimly. This might be it, he muttered aloud. The auctioneer's voice barked over the crowd. Next up, what we've got here is, well, hell, we got us a donkey. Colt barely looked up at first. The crowd did, though, only to collectively roll their eyes and murmur disapproval. A battered gray donkey limped into the pen, ribs showing through patchy fur, one ear nicked like it had lost a bar fight with a mountain cat. He looked pitiful, tired, the kind of animal someone should have put down mercifully months ago. Judson Kerr, the auctioneer, was trying too hard to sound cheerful. $5 to start. $5 for a working pack animal. Silence. Someone laughed. A young boy pointed and asked, "Is it dead?" Even the town drunk who once bought a goat thinking it was a cow turned away. Colt didn't mean to look at the donkey, but something tugged at him, some quiet magnetic pull. And when his gaze finally landed on the animal Roscoe, the air around him seemed to still. Roscoe was staring straight at him, not just looking staring, as if he saw through the worn boots, the unshaven jaw, the broken dreams, straight down to the shame Colt carried like old debt. There was no begging in those eyes, no fear, just recognition. Calm, patient, unnerving. Colt felt something shift inside him, a whisper in his gut he couldn't name. Not logic, not hope, just motion. His mouth moved before his brain caught up. $2. The words cracked through the still air like a whip. Judson blinked. His practiced grin faltered. "Two?" he repeated, slower this time. He scanned the crowd as if expecting someone to stop it. No one did. Most folks had already moved on. Colt stepped forward, holding out the coins. Judson didn't take them right away. Instead, he stepped off the platform and got in close, real close, like he was about to share a secret nobody wanted to hear. "Keep him out of sight," he muttered, voice low and sharp like a bad prayer. "And don't let nobody poke around too close, you hear me?" Colt tilted his head, unsure he'd heard right. "What's that supposed to mean?" Judson looked around again, as if expecting something to crawl out of the shadows. His eyes had a jitter to them now, like a man who'd seen something he wished he could forget. He snatched the coins and shoved them deep into his vest pocket. Then he backed away like Roscoe might bite. Colt reached for the rope halter. Roscoe didn't resist. In fact, he stepped forward on his own, as if the deal had always been between the two of them. They walked out of the yard under a silence that didn't feel natural. By the time they reached the edge of town, Colt noticed something odd. The donkey's limp, the one so exaggerated in the pen, was vanishing. Not all at once, but step by step, it faded like smoke. Roscoe's gait grew steadier, smoother. His breathing leveled, his ears perked forward. Colt frowned and rubbed his eyes. "You fakin', old boy?" Roscoe didn't answer, just kept walking with that quiet, assured rhythm. They crossed the dry wash, boots crunching in tandem. Colt led him up the rise behind town toward the long road home or whatever was left of it. Then Colt saw them. 3 riders on the ridge. They weren't moving, just silhouettes against the horizon, black and motionless, like part of the rock. Their horses stood still as death. No wave, no holler. Just watching. Colt stopped walking. Sweat slid down his spine. Roscoe didn't stop, but he did something else. He stamped his front hoof once hard into the dirt. A thump that echoed deeper than it should have. Colt's hand slipped toward the handle of his knife. "You seein' what I'm seein'?" he whispered. The donkey didn't look back, but his body had gone rigid, like a wire pulled tight. The riders remained. Then, one by one, they slowly turned their mounts and disappeared behind the ridge. Colt let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They made camp that night a few miles out, near an old juniper tree that had survived more droughts than any man could. The fire was low. Colt kept his rifle close. But Roscoe stood just outside the ring of firelight, still, quiet, ears twitching to sounds Colt couldn't hear. Sometime around midnight, just as Colt was drifting, Roscoe let out a low, guttural sound. It wasn't a bray. It wasn't any sound a donkey should have made. It was a signal. Deep, resonant, almost intelligent. Colt sat up fast. From far off in the hills, something answered. It wasn't a coyote. It wasn't an owl. It was something else. Something Colt couldn't name, but he knew damn well it had been waiting for that call. And suddenly, he wasn't sure if his $2 had bought him salvation or his own execution. The night passed slow and strange. Colt barely slept. Every time he drifted off, Roscoe would make a sound, a grunt, a snort, a shuffle of hooves in the dust that pulled him back into uneasy wakefulness. And always, the image of those riders on the ridge stuck with him. Their stillness, the way they watched. The answering call from the hills. By morning, the fire had gone to ash, and the desert was cold enough to sting. Roscoe stood exactly where he'd been all night, on the edge of camp, staring out into the open as if he hadn't moved an inch. Colt noticed that the donkey's ears twitched constantly, not randomly, but intentionally tracking the wind, maybe even tracking thoughts. "Either you're a damn ghost," Colt muttered, stretching his back, "or I'm losing what little sense I had left." Roscoe turned his head just slightly and let out a soft, controlled snort. Later that day, while Colt tried to patch a torn section of canvas on his wagon, he saw something that made him freeze. Roscoe was standing beside the wagon, facing the open dirt patch near where Colt kept his tools. The donkey pawed the ground once, then again, then a third time. He paused. Then 2 long scrapes. Another pause. Then 3 short ones. Colt dropped the hammer. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short again. He crouched down slowly. "Where'd you learn that?" It was a signal. Not Morse exactly, but a prospector's field code. One used decades ago to mark valuable sites. Valuable cargo nearby. Colt had seen that pattern scratched into canyon walls and carved into fence posts by desperate men long gone. Most folks missed it, but Colt had spent years out west hauling goods for prospectors and smugglers alike. He knew it when he saw it. Roscoe had just told him they were sitting on something important. Colt stood in the silent heat, his eyes scanning the barren land around them. Then he looked at the donkey again. "You trying to tell me something? You got more to say?" Roscoe stepped forward and nudged the wagon bed. Not randomly, not aimlessly, purposefully. Colt blinked. "You want it loaded?" Roscoe nudged again, firmer this time, then stepped back, lifting his head like he was waiting for Colt to figure the rest out. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the western ridge, Colt set up camp near a crumbling outcrop and began boiling coffee. Roscoe stood a few yards away, staring east. Not grazing, not resting, just watching the horizon, like he expected something to arrive any minute. Then, just as the sky turned orange, two men rode up the trail. Colt's hand fell instinctively to the rifle at his feet. The men dismounted like they had all the time in the world. One was sharp-jawed, clean clothes, confident stride. The other was built like a pit dog wide shoulders, a scar over his lip, and the kind of eyes that never blinked. "Evenin'," the clean-cut one said, smiling like a salesman who already knew the answer to your next three questions. "Evenin'," Colt replied, forcing his body to stay loose. "You boys lost?" "Not exactly," the man said, then nodded toward Roscoe. "We're looking for a mule, stubborn kind, gray coat, left leg's got a twitch to it." Colt didn't blink. "Ain't seen one." The man kept smiling, but the scarred one stepped closer, eyeing Roscoe like a butcher sizing up a prize hog. "Yours?" "Picked him up cheap yesterday." "That right?" the clean one said, slow. "Fella named Kerr still running auctions?" "Yeah." "Funny," the man said, glancing at his partner. "Thought Kerr had stopped dealing certain animals." Behind Colt, Roscoe had gone perfectly still. Not a muscle moved, but Colt could feel it tension humming like a drawn bowstring. The donkey's entire frame was coiled, as if he recognized these men. The scarred one took another step forward. "Mind if we take a closer look?" Colt's voice was steady. "I mind." Both men looked at him now, and the air grew tight. Then, like it had never happened, the clean-cut man smiled again. "All right then. Just thought we'd ask. If you see a mule matching that description, best keep him away from crowds. Some folks got a real attachment." They mounted up, slow as honey dripping from a rusted spout, then turned their horses around and disappeared back down the trail. Colt didn't exhale until he could no longer hear their hooves. Roscoe finally moved, shaking out his shoulders like someone coming out of a trance. He let out a soft noise, low and warning. Colt crouched next to him and whispered, "You knew them, didn't you?" The donkey didn't answer, but his whole body was still buzzing. That night, Colt couldn't shake it. He stared into the fire, piecing together everything that had happened. The code in the dirt, the unnatural intelligence, the bounty hunters, the auctioneer's whispered warning, and that look, those eyes that had locked on his like two loaded pistols. Roscoe wasn't just smart. He was trained. Colt waited until the moon was high. Then, with quiet hands, he walked to where Roscoe lay resting and gently ran his fingers along the donkey's left flank, where earlier he'd noticed a small, firm lump beneath the skin. It was still there, smooth and taut beneath the fur. "Don't kick me now," Colt whispered. He took out his pocket knife and flicked it open. With a deep breath, he parted the fur and sliced gently along the edge of the lump. Roscoe didn't flinch, not a twitch, just stared into the firelight like a monk. Inside the skin, wrapped in a waterproof cloth and stitched with surgical precision, was a pouch. Colt removed it with shaking fingers. Blood welled slightly, but Roscoe remained utterly calm. He unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a hand-drawn map. The paper was aged but well-preserved. Mountain lines sketched in charcoal, canyons marked in ink, a star drawn in deep red above a crooked valley. And next to the star, scrawled in faded script, a single word. Webb. Colt sat back on his heels, the map trembling in his hands. He stared at Roscoe. "You were carrying this the whole time?" The donkey looked at him. Just looked. But in that look was the same quiet message Colt had seen on that auction day. "You were meant to find me." Colt shook his head slowly. "You're not just carrying treasure." He looked down at the map again, the star pulsing under moonlight. "You were trained to protect it." Roscoe stepped forward, placed his nose against Colt's shoulder, just for a second. Then walked to the edge of the camp, turned toward the east, and stood guard. Dawn came with a silence that didn't feel natural. No birdsong, no wind. Just a brittle stillness as Colt loaded the map into his coat pocket, wiped Roscoe's blood from his hands, and tried to pretend the world hadn't just turned upside down. He kept glancing at the donkey. Roscoe stood alert, ears twitching, nostrils wide, scanning the land with a soldier's calm. Colt had grown up around animals, horses, cattle, goats. He'd seen them scared, stubborn, mean, but he'd never seen one think. Not like Roscoe did. Back at the ranch, what was left of it, the place looked like it had been picked apart by time and despair. Fences leaned like drunk men. The windmill groaned with each slow turn. An old water trough lay dry and cracked. It was a graveyard, with no crosses. Colt unsaddled the wagon, gave Roscoe a patch of shade beneath the shed's collapsed roof, then sat on the porch of the empty house and tried to breathe. He unfolded the map again. The star was marked in a canyon to the east far off, rugged country. Places he'd only ever seen as shapes on the horizon. But before he could make sense of the next step, they came. Just before dawn's full rise, hoofbeats soft at first, then louder, then thunder. 5 riders, no time to think. Colt dropped the map, grabbed the Henry rifle from the porch rail, and sprinted for the barn. He threw himself behind a stack of broken crates, heart pounding so hard he could taste blood in his mouth. The riders didn't speak as they approached. They fanned out with practiced ease. Their horses didn't whinny or spook. These weren't drunk raiders or dumb thieves. These men were trained. Wolves in ranchers' coats. The first one stepped forward. Colt recognized him. The scarred man. From the camp. No clean-cut partner this time. Just him and 4 more with dead eyes and fast hands. "You should have taken the hint," Scar called out. "Now we're going to take the mule and bury what you saw." Colt raised the rifle, but before he could aim, Roscoe exploded out of the shadows. He didn't bray, didn't scream, just moved fast and low, kicking dust high into the air in a thick cloud that swallowed the lead rider. Colt lost sight of everything for 3 seconds. Then he heard it. A crack not of a gun, but of bone. One of the riders went down screaming. Another fired into the haze, missing entirely. Roscoe kicked again, straight into the ribs of a third, sending the man flying off his horse with a dull thud. The 4th rider turned, spooked, and took off. Scar was the only one left standing. He raised a pistol, But Roscoe was already moving, charging full force with a sound Colt had never heard from any living creature. Not fury, not fear, purpose. Scar's horse panicked and bolted, dragging him a few feet before tossing him hard into the dirt. When the dust cleared, 4 men were on the ground. 2 conscious. 2 notes. Roscoe stood in the middle of them, panting, sides heaving, blood running down one leg from a grazing bullet. But his eyes were sharp, cold, alive. Colt stepped out from the barn, stunned. "What in God's name are you?" Roscoe turned and walked toward him, limping slightly, but with his head high. Colt stared down at the wreckage. These weren't just thugs. Their weapons were clean. Their coats carried the marks of a private outfit, not bandits, but hired men. And they hadn't come for food, or cash, or livestock. They'd come for Roscoe. After tying up the 2 survivors and dumping the other 2 outside the fence line, Colt began to inspect the wagon. Something about the attack didn't sit right. These men didn't stumble onto his place. They came with intent, timing, coordination. And Roscoe had known. Back inside the wagon, Colt noticed Roscoe sniffing near the driver's bench. He pawed at the wood once, then again, then stepped back. Colt pulled the plank loose. Inside was a leather-bound journal, stained with sweat, dirt, and time. On the first page, scrawled in an elegant but fading hand, "Property of Marcus Webb." Colt flipped the pages slowly, carefully. The handwriting told a story of a man who had discovered a mine, a cathedral carved by nature, veins of gold richer than anything ever documented in the region. But Marcus had been betrayed by men he trusted. They tried to kill him, tried to take it for themselves, so he'd fled, alone, with only one companion, Roscoe. The journal detailed how Marcus had sewn the map into the donkey's hide himself, trained the animal to follow hidden routes, buried caches, left signs only he would recognize, and he had one goal: if I don't make it back, Roscoe will. He'll find someone who can finish what I started, someone who won't sell it off to the highest bidder. Colt sat for a long time with that book in his lap, Roscoe watching him the whole while. He looked out across his land dry, broken, useless. He remembered the grave by the fence line, his old stallion, Dallas, the last thing that had felt like family. "I'm a failed rancher," he whispered. "A broken man." He glanced back at the 4 men Roscoe had dropped like dominoes. "And now I'm the only thing standing between that mine and a whole bunch of devils in suits." Night fell, and then, far off across the low hills, lights. Not lanterns, headlights, dozens of them, moving slow, controlled, a convoy, trucks, big ones. Colt stepped onto the porch with the rifle in his hand. Roscoe stood beside him. "They weren't just thieves now," Colt said, his voice low. "They're connected, and they're coming." Roscoe didn't move, just waited. Colt felt the weight of the journal in one hand, the weight of the map in his chest, and the crushing realization that if he ran, the whole thing would disappear again. But if he stayed... He looked at the donkey. "Run? Or dig in?" Roscoe turned slowly, looked toward the canyon on the far horizon, then back at Colt. Waiting. They left just before sunrise, the sky a smear of red above the hills, as Roscoe pulled the wagon with renewed strength. Colt rode alongside, the journal in his saddlebag, the map folded tight in his coat pocket, and a rifle slung across his back. He didn't speak much. Roscoe didn't make a sound at all. By midday, the trail had narrowed into a dry wash that twisted through rock formations older than time. The farther they got from Dry Hollow, the more it felt like stepping out of the world entirely. Civilization faded behind them, replaced by scrub, jagged stone, and silence that settled in the bones. Colt wasn't sure if the map or Roscoe was leading. Maybe both. The donkey would stop sometimes and sniff the air, or veer slightly off course toward a cluster of rocks or a leaning tree. Each time they'd find something, a cache of jerky wrapped in oilcloth, a canteen buried under flat stones, a coil of thick rope tied to an iron hook embedded in the cliff wall, all of it dated, all of it marked with a single letter scratched into nearby stone. W. Then came the red scarf. It was tied around the top branch of a crooked saguaro cactus at the mouth of a narrow canyon, faded by sun and dust, but still there, still defiant. Colt stared at it for a long time. The way it was tied, a tight triple knot on the north side of the stalk, was no accident. "That you, Webb?" Colt murmured. "Or a ghost wearing your boots?" Roscoe stood beside him, motionless, ears forward. Then he started walking again. They found the canyon late that afternoon, its walls rising like cathedral spires carved by wind and time. Inside, half buried in the sand, was a cache box made of cedar planks. The lid creaked when Colt pried it open. Ammunition, dried food, and a second journal smaller, older. He opened the first page and read aloud. "In case I don't make it. For whoever the mule finds next." He didn't get to finish the page. The sharp click of a revolver hammer broke the quiet. Colt turned slowly. A man sat astride a tall, well-fed stallion just a few yards away, flanked by 3 riders with long rifles resting across their laps. The lead man wore a dark gray suit, dusty but sharp. His hat was custom, the kind rich gamblers wore in riverboat towns. His voice was smooth as oiled leather. "Mr. Brenner, I presume." Colt nodded slowly. "You presume too much." The man grinned. "Name's Bellamy, Grant Bellamy. I believe you have something that don't belong to you." Colt's hand inched toward his belt. "That so?" "Oh, don't be dramatic," Bellamy said. "We don't want your life, just the mule." Roscoe stood behind Colt, muscles tensed, not fear preparation. "You came all this way," Colt said. "For a donkey?" Bellamy leaned forward in his saddle. "That's no donkey. That's a key. And I aim to use it." He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. Tossed it toward Colt. It landed in the dirt. Colt opened it. Gold. Rough nuggets, the size of marbles. Real, heavy, pure. $5,000 in there, Bellamy said. "More to come. Just hand him over." Colt stared at the pouch. His heart did a strange little stutter. It was more money than he'd seen in 10 years. Could buy the ranch back, build a new life, pay off every mistake he'd ever made. He looked back at Roscoe. The donkey's ears twitched once. Then he growled, not a bray, not a snort, a growl, deep, from somewhere primal. Colt closed the pouch and tossed it back. "Keep your money, and take your offer to hell with you." Bellamy's smile didn't fade. Pity. The riders raised their rifles, but Roscoe was already moving. He shoved Colt hard with his shoulder into the side of the canyon, then spun and bolted down a side trail, narrow and hidden behind a curve in the rock. Colt scrambled up and followed, dust in his mouth, bullets singing past his ears. Roscoe led him straight into an old, collapsed rail tunnel, half buried and forgotten. They ducked inside just as the first shot echoed behind them. Colt spun around, panting. "How the hell did you—" Roscoe kicked the support beam. The tunnel mouth collapsed in a roar of rock and dust, cutting them off from Bellamy's men. Colt coughed, choking on dirt, eyes wide. "You planned that?" Roscoe just snorted and kept walking into the dark, tail swishing like nothing happened. They followed the tunnel for an hour. Then the light changed. The path widened, and they stepped out into open air onto a ledge overlooking the lost cathedral mine. It wasn't just a hole in the ground. It was a canyon of gold. The sun hit the walls just right, and the ore gleamed in thick, raw veins across the stone like rivers of fire. Natural formations curved over the mine like archways. It looked like something built, not found. Sacred, eternal. But Roscoe wasn't finished. He kept climbing. Colt followed, stunned, hands shaking. They reached the top of the next ridge and found a stone fortress. Not man-made, but shaped by nature to resemble one. Rock walls, narrow passes, a natural spring bubbling in the center. From up there, Colt could see the whole valley. "You didn't just find gold," he whispered to Roscoe. "You found a kingdom." The donkey grazed nearby, chewing lazily, but even then his ears turned to the wind, always listening, always watching. Below, at the canyon's edge, Colt saw them. Riders, dozens. The next wave had come. Colt placed a hand on Roscoe's neck. They came for gold. The donkey looked at him, calm and fearless. "But what they found," Colt said, voice tightening, "was the one damn animal that refused to stay buried with it. The fortress held the morning like a cathedral holds prayer stone walls catching sun, wind howling through natural archways, the spring bubbling in the hollow center, as if even water had learned to be quiet here." Colt stood at the ledge, the journal of Marcus Webb open on a flat rock beside him. Below, dust rose on the valley floor. Bellamy's army was coming. 30 riders, maybe more. Men in tailored dusters, rifles gleaming in the dawn, led by a man who didn't blink when bullets flew. Bellamy sat tall in his saddle, looking up at the cliffs like a general surveying a castle he intended to tear down brick by brick. Colt knew there wouldn't be another tunnel to hide in. No clever trap this time. Just a ridge, a rifle, and one donkey that refused to back down. He reached into the supply cache Webb had buried years ago and pulled out a handful of gold nuggets, real gold. Not just bait, but enough to tempt any man. Colt scattered them across the narrow pass leading up the ridge, letting them glint in the sun. A whisper to the wind, "Come and take it." Roscoe stood beside him, tail still, legs braced, jaw tight. The wound from the earlier fight had crusted over with dry blood, but it hadn't slowed him. If anything, it made him look fiercer, more elemental, like some spirit from the desert, dragged into flesh to finish a fight started long before Colt was ever born. Bellamy's men reached the gold trail first. Just like Colt had hoped, they hesitated. They dismounted, bent down, started arguing. Greed was louder than orders. Colt took aim. He didn't fire, didn't need to. Roscoe moved. The donkey stepped forward and slammed a boulder with his shoulder, a calculated strike. The edge of the trail crumbled, and the loose gravel beneath the rider's feet gave way. 2 of them went tumbling down the canyon wall. The others scrambled back in a panic. The chaos bought time. Bellamy, to his credit, never blinked. He rode straight through the dust, straight up the path, straight into Colt's line of fire. Colt didn't lower the rifle. "Turn around." Bellamy smiled, slow and condescending. "You gonna shoot me over a mine, Brenner?" Colt's eyes narrowed. "Not over a mine." He looked at Roscoe. The donkey stepped forward, limping, bleeding, but tall. Bellamy's expression shifted. Not fear. Not yet. But he blinked. Just once. "That thing," he muttered. "That animal's the only reason any of this happened." Colt nodded. "He didn't forget. That's what scares you." Bellamy's voice lost some of its charm. You don't understand the game you're in." "I do now," Colt said, and with a flick of his wrist, he tossed the last gold nugget down into the dust between them. "It ain't about gold. It's about what it builds." Bellamy drew, too slow. Roscoe was faster. The donkey lunged with a sound like thunder, knocking Bellamy from his saddle. The gun skittered off the cliff. Colt rushed forward, grabbed Bellamy by the collar, and slammed him into the rock wall. "You buried a man for this," he hissed. "And that man taught a donkey to finish what you cowards couldn't." Bellamy was spitting dirt. "You think you'll walk away from this? You think justice gives a damn out here?" "I think Marcus Webb did," Colt growled. "And I think that's enough." He tied Bellamy's hands behind his back, dragged him down the trail, and left him for the marshals who were already on their way. Colt had made sure of that. 3 days earlier, he'd sent copies of the journal, the map, and the names in Webb's notes to the Territorial Marshal Service, 2 newspapers, and 1 church lawyer with a loud voice and a long memory. By the time Bellamy's men regrouped, it was too late. Colt and Roscoe were gone. They returned to Dry Hollow a week later, but it wasn't the dry hollow Colt had left. It was blooming. The new water system ran clean and cold. A freshly raised schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, red paint bright against the dust. The Webb Memorial Hall, built from the profits of the first shipment out of the mine, sat in the center of Main Street, housing the original journal, the map, and a replica of Webb's badge. Colt didn't keep the gold. He kept the land, he kept the name, and he kept the story. Roscoe lived quietly in the canyon pasture just beyond town. Folks came from miles around to see him, the donkey who wouldn't forget. Kids fed him carrots and asked their parents if animals could really remember the past. Colt would just smile. He didn't remember, he'd say. He carried it. When the donkey's time came on a spring morning under blue skies, Colt buried him at the hilltop overlooking the mine. He carved a marker from old timber and laid one of Marcus Webb's brass buttons into the wood. The plaque read, "Roscoe, the one who brought justice back from the dead." Years passed. Men came and went. Fortunes rose and fell. But Dry Hollow stood tall. It stood because one man listened to a wounded donkey with a memory longer than most families. It stood because truth is heavier than gold, and sometimes justice rides in on 4 hooves and a limp. And when folks asked Colt Brenner if he ever regretted spending those $2 silver at the livestock auction so many years ago, he'd just lean back, tip his hat, and answer, "Best investment I ever made." Then he'd look toward the canyon, where the wind still howled like it had something left to say. They say true treasures aren't always what they seem. Roscoe proved that a simple gamble can uncover a powerful truth. Now, after hearing Colt's incredible journey, if you had that map in your hands, what would you have done with it? Tell us your thoughts in the comments section. And for more untold tales of the rugged West and the brave souls who lived there, be sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.